Good morning. My name is Allinson. I am a Senior Conservation Scientist at BirdLife International. I lead our work on bird conservation and energy. Today, I will talk about the importance of sensitivity mapping in reconciling bird conservation with the deployment of energy infrastructure. Whilst electrification and renewable energy expansion are essential, they can pose a significant environmental risk if not planned in a nature-safe manner. Already, there are over 65 million kilometres of power line globally, enough to stretch the moon and back 169 times. And it is calculated that this amount will need to more than double in order to accommodate the transition to renewables. Poorly sited, badly designed, and insufficiently mitigated energy infrastructure can significantly impact biodiversity, especially birds. Some species are highly susceptible to collision with power lines. In this video, we see mute swans colliding with a line in Slovakia. Note, the collisions are occurring on the section of line that has not been fitted with bird flight diverters. Even when not fatal, power lines can disorientate and confuse flying birds, as seen in this footage of a common crane flock encountering a transmission line in India. Birds can also be vulnerable to electrocution on poorly designed and insulated lines. Ensuring that power line infrastructure is constructed in a nature-safe manner requires that its development adheres to the mitigation hierarchy. The mitigation hierarchy is a stepwise framework, starting with the most important consideration and then continuing through increasingly less desirable alternatives. Importantly, subsequent stages of the hierarchy should only be applied if an earlier stage has been fully considered but is deemed to be not possible or not likely to be sufficient in ameliorating the negative impacts of the development. The first, and by far the most effective stage of the mitigation hierarchy, is avoidance. Routing power lines away from high-risk areas such must be the first consideration. When placement in a high-risk area is unavoidable, then line burial should be considered. If avoidance is not possible, then risk should be minimized through mitigation measures. Restoration should be considered when damage was unavoidable, but can be rectified. Offsetting is the last option to be considered, and only when all previous measures have proven ineffective. Although avoidance is by far the most important component of the mitigation hierarchy, it is too often omitted or applied poorly. Too often, biodiversity is only considered once a development site has already been identified. A site-level assessment can only ever tell you if a site has sensitive wildlife. It cannot tell you how sensitive that site is relative to the wider landscape, and indeed whether there are more suitable locations elsewhere. To meet this requirement, the requirements of the mitigation hierarchy, there is a need to consider biodiversity further upstream in the development process, when a whole country or region can be strategically assessed and development optimized from both an environmental and technical standpoint. One of the key ways to integrate biodiversity data into strategic landscape scale planning is to utilize sensitivity mapping. In sensitivity mapping, distributional data on sensitive species and ecological features are used to produce maps indicating the potential sensitivity of an area to a certain form of infrastructure. Some of the first sensitivity maps were developed by BirdLife's partner in the UK, the RSPB. These depicted avian sensitivity in relation to wind energy development. The first such map was developed for Scotland. The darker areas on the map were those assessed to be most sensitive to wind energy development. The lighter areas are those thought to be least sensitive. If we look at where wind farms were subsequently developed in Scotland, all the blue and green shapes are constructed wind farms of various sizes, we can see that those areas assessed by the RSPB as likely to be least sensitive, and therefore most suitable, are to a large extent the areas where development has occurred. Scotland therefore constitutes a good example of how to plan a renewable energy sector in a responsible and nature-safe manner. Most recently, BirdLife International, with support from the Asian Development Bank, has developed an online sensitivity mapping platform called AVISTEP, AVI for bird and STEP for sensitivity tool for energy planning. and also an allusion to the fact that the use of such tools should be seen as an essential first step in nature-safe energy planning. AVISTEP launched in 2022, initially covering 4 countries in Asia. Work is now underway to expand it globally. AVISTEP is designed to be intuitive to use, requiring no specialist knowledge. However, it is recommended that first-time users watch the short tutorial video before exploring the tool. The homepage also contains a manual documenting the methodology underpinning AVISTEP in detail. Once a country is selected, a user can then choose the energy type for which they would like to understand the avian sensitivity. These are onshore wind energy, offshore wind energy, solar photovoltaic, and overhead power lines, both low and medium voltage distribution lines and high voltage transmission lines. Selecting transmission lines reveals the avian sensitivity to this infrastructure type across the selected country. There are 4 categories of sensitivity: low, moderate, high, and very high. Users can see what size and percentage of area falls within each of these categories. Users can also review the avian sensitivity at the state or province level, for example, in Rajasthan. Users can focus in on specific locations and receive a detailed assessment of avian sensitivity. As a user moves into the map, a 5 km by 5 km grid is revealed. At this point, a user can click on a grid cell to get the sensitivity assessment for that cell. For instance, this grid cell receives a sensitivity score of 100%. This means that the avian sensitivity is assessed as very high. Development here is considered to pose a very high risk to bird populations. However, comprehensive site-level assessment is necessary to confirm this level of risk. This grid cell, for instance, falls within the Desert National Park and is considered an important bird area. There are also 25 species considered sensitive to collision with transmission lines that could occur at this site. They are listed starting with the most sensitive, in this case Great Indian Bustard, a species highly impacted by power lines. They then move on to less sensitive species. The occurrence certainty indicates how certain it is that the species occurs within that grid cell. By clicking on occurrence certainty, the species are ordered beginning with those there is very high certainty of their occurrence. Those assessed as very high, for more than 50% of the cell is covered by their preferred habitat, and their presence has been confirmed by on-the-ground surveys. If we switch to the map for distribution lines, we can see that this assessment takes account of both collision and electrocution. For example, at this site, 43 species are identified as being affected by collision and/or electrocution. The most electrocution-prone species being vultures, eagles, and falcons, due to their habit for perching on powerline poles and the fact that their large size makes simultaneous contact with two live elements more likely. AVISTEP provides planners and developers with an early understanding of the biodiversity situation so that they can be better prepared and can avoid high-risk areas or factor suitable mitigation into their project design from the outset. BirdLife is committed to expanding AVISTEP to new regions and countries around the world in collaboration with the energy sector. Thank you for listening.